of the rich. There is nothing in the world that replaces power for a person who has 3 meals a day, all the clothes they can wear, all the trips around the world they can take, all of the holidays, whatever. Once you get beyond that, and I'm told $27 million is about the break-even point. Once you get beyond that, there's nothing more except power. And these people who took power under the guise of religion, they have more than that. At the top, mind you, they too use their agents, their slaves within their communities, and most of the people that you will see next door is on a need-to-know basis. That's why secret societies have degrees, 0 to 90 degrees, so that at every step of the way they know a little more about what is really going on. But they're always blackmailed in such a way that they're rising to the top of this pyramid, never able to descend again without having mortal problems. And eventually, what this cloning led to was the creation of a new species of human beings, a new clan of human beings that was a clan of agents, which we hear a little bit about, but not in detail. And the name given to them by science is Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnon suggests Asian, and it suggests man, and it suggests no theater, for example. Kabuki dance, Japanese, J-A, pan, pan, pan. Help, 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 danger, danger, danger. So it was decided to test out what benefits could be gained to having a new clan of people, different than the Neanderthals, somewhat like the humans, but of a different color, black being all of the people that existed at the time in Africa. So the old barkeeper, genetic engineer, began to mix that concoction that would be put in an egg and made a new being called Cro-Magnon that was brown, dark brown in color. You know, black has all the colors in it, white has no color, so it was a matter of extracting from the black until you got a brownish color as opposed to the black of Africa, and that made it easier for the Neanderthals to know, well, this is the gang we have the war against, the women and the black people who want to help them, but the brown people are our group. This week we have a winner of the Preakness, won the Kentucky Derby a couple of weeks ago, called Big Brown. Gives you a sense of the development that can occur in our own society. In any event, when it was clear that gays, lesbians, brown people, could be used as agents in this war on women, and each of them operating on a need-to-know basis. So some at the bottom know nothing, and some in the middle know some things and don't know other things, and others at the top would know what's really going on. They decided that it would be a good time for them to get the hell out of Africa. And the first stage of their departure was a movement from the continent of Africa to the islands in what we call the Indian Gulf these days, a big island called Madagascar. Mad because it acts as a dam. Mad backwards. It acts as a dam, and that dam means there's one period of time on one side and a different period of time on the other side. And in that middle group, they could plan how to go about this in the future. All of a sudden, an accident of nature occurred, which was to last 16,000 years. The Ice Age, the last Ice Age. Not the first, it had happened before. They may have known it was about to happen. But it began, and ice started to come down further and further from the north. You have to understand that at that time, Antarctica was an island someplace out there that was south of where they were, and a nice place to live on. And from Madagascar, over time, a move was made to Antarctica. The biggest island in the world. If you look at Antarctica from above, shaped like a big white rabbit today, big hare in those days, Hare Krishna, big white rabbit, you realize by looking down there is only one ocean in the world, and it all leads out. And to confuse us, the map makers of today have put the North Pole at the top and the Northern Hemisphere at the top, where in fact, in reality, they should have been making Antarctica at the top, leading down from there to the other continents, but they wanted to keep their secret, so they had to disguise who's really in charge by hiding him at the bottom. But the word bottom translates as well to the word low, and backwards that, or by playing with the letters, that word is also owl. And the reason for the little owl hidden on the American dollar bill in the corner is the encapsulation of this entire story that I'm telling you, is that there's a little wise owl who lives down below and has a wall, a dam between him and the rest of the world as he undertakes to steal power from the women on the planet. But before that happens, he must stop everything from happening, back things down, and restart them again at a later date in a way that people who live through the transition will not remember the past and believe that life on this planet began 6,000 years ago instead of 60,000 years ago. So I'll stop now. I'm always accused of speaking too long. I don't know how to explain 60,000 years of activity in less time than I do. I've practiced for years and years and years, but yet if I were to explain this thing to you and had all the time I needed, it would probably take me 40 years. So after the break, we'll come back and we'll deal with the period of time following the Ice Age until the advent of the third religion out of Jerusalem. Thank you. Have a good walk, and you can start this over when you're ready. And you can repeat it as many times as you need to over the next year or 2 or 3, because you're going to need to understand what's happening in your induced existence on this planet. Okay, so I'm back. It's 11:21 our time here. You may see a different time on the film here, on the video, because I did not reset the time from its original setting in California, so we may be a few minutes off on the time and a few hours off because of the time zone here being 3 hours different than California. In any event, what we were talking about was a group of people unknown to most who live on the planet today by the name of Neanderthaler, but known basically to a group of individuals who managed the world through priesthoods and have fronting for them transnational corporations on one side and government and politics on the other side, managed by a group we call the media, and by that not just news media, but the extended media that includes Hollywood, it includes publishers, it includes anyone in the professions who do work that is not required work for the production of goods, but more as a service industry, and architects, accountants, lawyers, doctors fall into that category. The name media basically comes from a city or a country in what was formerly Persia, southern Iran, capital city called Susa, which is very much incorporating the letters of USA, and the country being media. Its relationships are to Kurds and Basques and Australia, Austria, and their basic job is to polarize the two teams on any argument, whether the argument be about creation versus evolution, without ever allowing a discussion of the role of genetic engineering as being fundamental to the premise of the things we are discussing here today. And when election time comes, of course, they have a number of ways of manipulating the events in such a way that the choices become obvious, or they force decisions through, say, the Supreme Court, which is part of the extended media, police, prisons, jurisdictions that basically provide services, education, universities. So we were basically dealing with this group of people called Neanderthals. We don't have to worry too much about explaining how the human being acts today. That's pretty obvious to all of you out there. If there are things such as infiltration of women's groups using gender modification, I'll explain it along the way. But generally speaking, we know that there's a group of people who have been convinced they're free without having anyone explain the fact that by free it meant they cost the Neanderthals nothing in order to get and obtain their services. The Ice Age on Antarctica forced a major change in the location of the home of Neanderthals. They had basically planned to be on the island, on the surface, away from all of this riffraff they were going to create. However, with the Ice Age coming on and affecting Antarctica, it sent them back to the mountains and to the caves. But to them, there came an advantage. If I was, and I have never visited, but if I were invited to go to an area controlled by Neanderthals today, I would suggest that the area under what is called Queen Maud land in Australia would be a good place to start, and the entry points would be at the Kemp Coast. We are in Kemptville, Ontario. That is the Kemp Coast of Antarctica. And the middle place between here and there is a place in the mountains in northern Yemen, southern Saudi Arabia, called Empty Quarter. So EMPT is basically the link that ties all of this stuff together. So the Kemp Coast of Australia, and there is a mountain range there called the American Mountains. I'm sure it wasn't known as the American Mountains back when it first became important, because that would be at about 24,000 BC when they decided to go down into the caves. And here I have to give you a little understanding of how the planet Earth is put together, so that you will understand where religion got its ideas from and how the world really functions. there is, at the core of this planet, a fireball, a mixture of chemicals constantly burning, producing different chemistry and metallurgy, and that core of the Earth is linked to the surface by what is known as a cone volcano. You know how a cone shape is made, and the effect from the kitchen at the center of the Earth and the surface of the planet is done through the expulsion of lava up to the top and then expanding on what we call the surface. Around this kitchen, this cone at the center of the planet, there is a mantle area. You know, a mantle on a fireplace, it protects basically the inside of the room from the fire down below. This is not much different. You have an area that surrounds the core that holds the heat back into the center of the planet, and there is known to scientists a division in this mantle called a lower mantle and upper mantle. So if you can imagine that there would be a similarity here to an egg, where the yolk would represent the core, the center of activity, and the white of the egg would represent the mantle, which feeds the core and also allows things to develop within the core. And surrounding all of this core and mantle is a shell, and that shell is called the moho discontinuity. It may not have been there all along, because it is basically the residue of all things that lived on the planet eventually and sunk down through the earth and through the water, through the lakes, rivers, streams, down to the oceans, and became sediment at the bottom of the oceans. The material is called basalt as opposed to salt, and it is basically a combination of salt and stone, sediment that has accumulated around this core of the earth, the mantle and the core, since the advent of water on the planet. So, without getting into too much chemistry, if you can understand that the core and the mantle held this planet together at the beginning. This was the planet. And through a process too long to explain, water condensed upon the surface, and lava was sent up in flues through cone volcanoes and spewed its lava upon the earth, upon the surface of the mantle, and eventually built up so that it became visible above the water, and above the water would be islands at the beginning, and eventually continents. And these islands are basically floating on plates, which is the accumulated lava, and things now grow upon the surface of these plates and die. And since our composition, our chemical composition, is mostly salt and water, that salt then is added to what was at one time fresh water until it reaches a breaking point, if you will, that if you keep adding salt to water, you will kill the salt and you'll kill the water and therefore prevent anything from living in it. So the gravity's effect upon the planet has the role of pushing the salt down, and you have to imagine that the oceans can survive well with, say, 11% salt, but would die with a quantity over it and become fresh water with less, that the gravity pushes the excess salt down to the bottom, and it is that excess salt and sediment that has gathered around the upper mantle of the core of the earth, about 3 miles below the bottom of the ocean. Deeper in some places, further down in some places, if there happens to be a big mountain on top of the continent that happens to be over a certain area. So it's not an egg-shaped thing in the way that we see an egg today, because it would have all these dips and dives in it depending on what's floating on top. It can be, I'm told, as far down as about 30 or 35 miles under the Himalayas before you would reach the moho discontinuity, whereas in the Pacific Ocean it would be about 3 miles below the surface. So not a far place, but a significant distance down below. Now, if you can imagine that you are floating on an island on the sea called Antarctica, and you enter an extinct volcano and you make your way down, and again, we're talking here, the Ice Age lasted 16,000 years. So that's 8 times the time since the time of the Bible. So it's a long, long period of time. And eventually you made your way down and you discovered that there was an area between the ocean floor and the mantle that was totally appropriate to tunneling, the moho discontinuity. Hard enough to keep all the water out and to limit the damage done by lava coming through it, yet soft enough to dig, tunnels and make rooms within that area. And that place is called the moho discontinuity. Not an accident that the name sounds very much like homo. Pasteurized milk floats its cream on the top, whereas homo, it's kind of all mixed in together. This area, the moho discontinuity, became the official residence of the Neanderthals, as they planned what they would have known would be a comeback on the surface of the Earth once the ice age ended and the ice began to recede. You have to remember, these are people who have been keeping records, and they knew that this was the fourth ice age, and therefore there's a beginning and there's an end, and the beginning was about 24,000 BC, and the middle part was about 16,000 BC, where the ice would start to melt, and what we know today is closer to the end, not quite, because we still have ice on parts of the world, the North Pole and the South Pole, top of mountains, and that there would be a normal time in the future where ice would no longer be present on the surface of the planet until some other major change occurred. The other option was that something could be done to induce the end of the ice age to come sooner rather than at its normal junction in time. And the most likely thing for people who have lived underground all their lives to be examining is the possibility of igniting the coal seams from down below, which would bring heat to the surface of the planet quicker than nature intended, and as well from the melting of the permafrost on the surface of the Earth, you would then get the kind of carbon gases that exist today and are being blamed for being the cause of global warming. Well, if everything that ever lived and has not yet made its way down as basalt sediment below the bottom of the ocean, but is in transition, begins to melt in the permafrost, then it emits gases. And since there have been times when the planet has shifted positions, where the equator is now the North Pole and the North Pole is now the equator, this kind of material exists all over the planet, and any heat begun below would exacerbate the problem on the surface as ice began to melt. It certainly gives Al Gore an opportunity to get a Nobel Peace Prize and an Academy Award by misleading the population as to what the real cause of climate change we're living today is. So try to imagine that below ground In the moho discontinuity, the Neanderthaler set up his transportation system in a geodesic type structure in the moho discontinuity, allowing travel to any part of the globe, and to have his chemical computer set up in a mobile transportation system that guarantees it's never at the same place at any time that can be calculated, so that it can be penetrated or attacked, because you never really know where it's going to be, and you can probably duplicate it or triplicate it and have it go in all kinds of directions. Of course, with the geodesic pattern, you have the advantage if nature decides to send a volcano up in one direction and pierces the moho discontinuity, then you have 4 or 5 different routes around the problem until you can get back to repairing things if you need them repaired. People live on the surface. They have no material left to them that allows them to know history after a few generations. But after 16,000 years, everything is forgotten, and people are back to acting like cavemen. Cave dwellers have the information, the genius, the wisdom in their possession to kickstart the world again. This time with the advantage that they want to do it in a way that will end up making them masters of the universe. The first problem they have is building a team of people. They will send back to the surface and maroon them there permanently, so that they can begin the process of taking control over Africa. The advantage they have is they've already built a group of people called Cro-Magnon, who are in southern Africa, known today as the San people. And they know that they can make a copy of these people and start the process over again. So they take the name Cro-Magnon, drop the C, and keep the R and the O, and then they take the M and A and say, that's Ma, I'm Pa, and this is the kettle, Ma and Pa kettle. This is where we're going to make a new stew, and we're going to make a group of people called Roma, Roma. And we're going to send them. And I'm skipping over a whole bunch of things like making animals, depositing them in Australia and the islands in the Pacific, and testing out to see which would be the best way to go, and then working out the systems using all of the knowledge they gained from looking at the stars, the pattern of activity you want, which is basically the kangaroo, eventually the marsupial, is a good example of the eventual being they want, a single animal that can give birth but be task specific to a job. and a instrument instead of the spear, I had the name on the tip of my tongue, a boomerang, will be symbolic of what they're going to be doing. They will be sending out a team of people who will do things and eventually bring things back. Where they're located in Antarctica at the Kemp Coast is directly facing India, and the area in front of India today we call Sri Lanka. The area of India directly facing Sri Lanka, once you get into India, is called Madras. So the plan basically is to take the Roma and maroon them on Sri Lanka. That's Anka is their anchor, and send the gang Sri out. And these names were not given recently in English by accident. They were to reflect a code that those in the know would then be able to track. And if you have IRS in Sri Lanka and you have Krishna over in India, it's not an accident they both have IRS in it, or that later you find the IRS in Paris, or as the toll gaters of the Western world, the tax collectors. So, to make a long story short, or shorter, a group of people placed on Sri Lanka move to its second position in India, decide that they need other players in their game to do the work, because it's like any bureaucrat. You're given a job in government. The first job you take up is to find somebody to do your job so you can go do the golfing and that kind of stuff, count the money, rather than have to do the physical work. So they decide that these Roma are going to send a group into the mountains, the Himalayas above India, and find the second highest. They like number 2 more than number 1, because number 2 is really number 1. It has all the power. And that's why if you look at a clock and you say, what's the smallest amount of time shown on a normal clock, it's not called a first, but it's called a second, because it's giving you the message that number 2 is number 1. So finding the second location in the mountains of the Himalayas, the second highest mountain, we call it K2 today, because K1 was where the Cro-Magnon were made, which is Mount Kilimanjaro. It has 3 peaks, 2 in Tanzania, 1 in Kenya, and it has Mount Meru over on the side where the genetic engineering gang lived and acted basically like the managers of the events. But this group they make is going to be sent east, and they're basically called Asians. And later on they'll make a second group, Red Asians, which they call Persians. They're called red because they've been marooned. Native people called themselves red men without quite understanding what it was. We laughed when we were kids and said that people came from Europe to America looking for India. But in fact, that's what they were doing. They were looking for the Indians who lived in America, having been marooned here as red men, and to tell them where their journey started from, they had Turkey, because Turkey is the middle point between Asia and Europe. In any event, Asians were sent down through Malaysia, Burma, Java, the islands, and Japan, China, Korea, North and South, Vietnam. If you look at the word Korea and the word Iraq, the letters are basically backwards. The phonetic sounds are backwards. Iraq, Korea. Iraq, Korea. In French, the word Korea is Kari. So it's Iraq backwards. Taiwan is Tao, man. The M as a W can be flipped over in the code. I, O, U are three letters linked together, so therefore the I can be an O or it can be a U, and if it's T-A-I, it can also be T-A-U, which makes it Tao, man. And the Tao cross is the cross that has a circle around it. It means you start here, you go and you do all of this, and you come back here. And if you look at Catholic prayer beads, these beads have a cross, and it has an ecclesiastic bead, P bead, to signify the monk or the priest or rabbi, and then it has three of the slaves, three of the ordinary people, followed by another P bead, and then it begins a series of 10 groups of 10 P beads, accentuated in the middle of each 10, five different groups, with the bead at which you say Our Father. So there is the Father and then a lot of mothers, another father, a lot of mothers, another father, and but when you come to the top, what you're seeing is a cross, and the cross is basically indicative of you come out of the ground and you go east and west, and at the end you go up into the sky. You go outside the realm of this planet, past the sun, towards the Oort cloud, Oort being the word translated to root cloud, from which all the comets come and bring new chemistry and new metallurgy that will bring different kinds of life on the planet. If you go through trial and error, as evolution usually does, what you have is an ongoing testing of the system. You get a concept that says muscles, strength is most important, and you build animals called dinosaurs. These dinosaurs, by the way, have dino at the beginning, which is linked to the word dean. And the dean is linked to the guy who has all the knowledge at the university in a special field. And in Pasadena, it's how they pass it on through the information given for the year in the Ruse Bowl Parade. Ruse is a scheme. B, owl. Ruse B, owl parade that happens there. In any event, from the second group of people, the brown people, sent one of their team out to Africa to begin the process of taking over Africa, while they sent the yellow team out to China and the rest of the area around the area of the East to do skull and bones trial and error tests on what makes the smartest man, what makes the strongest man, what makes whatever, because they had proven to themselves in the earlier experiments that dinosaurs may be the most powerful animal in the world, but that does not make them significant. So when they were able to manufacture human beings with a divided brain, the history in the spine, the reason in the head, there was a destruction that came about of the dinosaur and a building of the human being. That's all activity done by creation as it tests out different systems. Here you have the kidnapper of the evolutionary system of creation, and you begin to have an engineering of the system of creation by a top dog who calls himself God, who wants you to love him, adore him, is even buying you bigger bucks. In any event, this group of brown people goes and sets out a model for what they have to do, and they are wanderers from India, and became known as gypsies, and they are brown in color, and they start building as priests this Giza plateau and all of the statues in there that have the three approaches: corporate approach, government approach, and then the media in the middle. But the cat on the side is representative of who really is managing this, the media on the side, the big giant tiger over there called the Sphinx. But as they build this and use African people as their employees, they start to have relations between the two groups and get into trouble, because that intermingling of the black African and the brown Roma now creates an off color, which is mulatto, and disturbs the plan for the moment, because they're having a lot of trouble telling on whose team the players are. So they pull back the authority they had given to these Egyptians, gypsies from India, and India at the time included a place we now call Pakistan as well. Pak is tan. Pa, mission, is tan. Another group of people has to be created because they need to find out how to get off the planet and fly. Now, you can do all kinds of experiments when you're living in a cave or underground, but flying is not one of them. So what they need to do is create a different Asian that flies. And the Asian is considered the chicken, lays all the eggs, makes all the people over there. But the rooster that flies is going to be called a cock Asian. And it's going to have its beginning at the edge of a place they call Turkey. So the turkey is going to be the watcher of activity, and the Caucasian is going to live on the rest of the European continent. And down the road, when it comes time to go into space, they'll have to create a laboratory, ended up being called America after their head office in Sousa, USA. IC, which is in America, from sea to shining sea. And of course, before they decided on building America where it was, they had to have certain conditions that matched those of Europe. And the conditions would be tied to a knowledge that this particular place on the planet, this quarter of the planet between the southern hemisphere and the Arctic, this quarter of the planet around the entire world, could be emptied of its population once the shelf life of these people had expired. And they all had to fit within the same quarter of the planet as the Asians that they had put up there, leaving the southern part of the American continent, South America, not as we know it, but from a certain point in South America going down to survive this shelf life, leaving the southern part of Africa to survive this, and of course Australia, and depending on where you're sitting and from their point of view, Australia is basically in the middle. If Africa is over there and South America is over there, and it gives them their three survivors, temporary nonetheless, but survivors for 1,000 years after the shelf life of the lower half of the northern hemisphere expires. And when is that lower half to expire? Once the task of getting craft off the Earth, building a space station, and sending crafts out into the solar system, beyond the solar system to the Oort cloud. That means beyond Pluto. Guess what? This is it. There is a spacecraft on its way there. We have arrived at the end times. But in order to set the stage for everything that was to happen, they had to transfer knowledge of technology, much like you would by handing over manuals, to the Chinese and other Asians in the area. And the technology was worked out for everything that Marco Polo, following the Crusades, was then leased and brought back to the Medici, media here, Medici family in Florence, Italy, that began what we have called the Renaissance, the rebirth. And the rebirth is basically to bring people in the Western Hemisphere, northern area is what's involved, taking the technology from the East, transferring it to the West, putting it into practice and taking it to the level it had arrived at before, and going beyond that, both in the realm of skull and bones, developing the brain, developing the body, so that there would be task-specific machines clothed in the form of a human body to tackle each job that would need to be done at some time in the future. And that machine would have to be tan in color, and therefore the names given to all the countries surrounding the Himalayas, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, all of the Istan names basically suggest that you have to use that as a guidepost, so that at one stage of the game you have to get away from the original color of the races and merge them into one color, which is preferably tan. The other use of the word Istan is if you turn it around and phonetically you make the words Nazi, saints, antes, all of which become useful as markers for the people on their side. So you have a group of people who are for things, and then you have the people who are antis. Republicans push certain ideas, Democrats go against it. The media sits in the middle and makes the population as a whole agree or disagree with either side. The Nazis can create war. The saints can stop wars. The code that I read through the encyclopedias, the dictionaries, the Shakespearean plays, operas, Walt Disney, medicine, the medicine we take is all drugs of one nature or another, and it is, medicine is for our body, but the cine part, the TV part, the movie part, all of the cine that comes out of California is linked to affecting the brain, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it's by using pictures that they're able to manufacture things. So the Caucasians were given this task out of a place called Persia, and the media would fall in between and watch over them. Now, prior to the technology transfer, you had to have a coming together of the people in the West and the people in the East, and the place chosen for that was Jerusalem, and the name given to the activity was Crusade. Aid, ruse. The Crusades allowed St. Bernard to claim that a group of people was required in the Middle East to protect pilgrims to the home of Christianity. The same information is used by the protectors of Judaism as the home of the place where the builders of the Giza Plateau transferred the knowledge out of Egypt and to Jerusalem, and is then used again by the Persians and their Islamic division, which translates to I am one, or ami, friends, so that a fight, ongoing fight, could take place in this place called Jerusalem as a cover to the transfer of technology out of the Far East through Persia and to the West, and the establishing of a compact or an agreement between all the players as to the rental fees payable for this activity. The rental fees had to be structured in such a way as the government would have an input, the corporations would have an input, and the media would have an input, each one taking out what you would call tithes, taxes, or fees. And that money could be funneled back through to the Middle East and onward to the big bank underground in the mountains called Tibet. I found it quite funny that the Rose Bowl parade that was held this year introduced a gentleman who was responsible for choosing the princesses and the queen of the parade, and his name was Tibet. And we hadn't heard anything about Tibet recently in the recent years, except in secret societies who talk about the genius of this buds for you, Buddhism, sent out to that area by the Indians in northern India, but and is now part of China. But to have a hint that Tibet would become important by naming the guy who chose the princesses Tibet, and then having what we've experienced this year is the revival of Tibet as the focus of the Olympic flame, Olympic, original lamp I see, Olympic flame. Now, the Olympics is basically the test set out to discover how evolved the human body has become when it comes to a task-specific thing. How high can you jump? How far can you jump? How fast can you run? How can you skate? How can you pole vault? Each one of the tasks considered by the Olympics are the target on which others want to improve from year to year, until now we're down to a millisecond improvement. So it gives the controllers confidence that improvement over what they have now is not going to be spectacular, but in very small detail from now on. And of course, similar activity is going on to identify the functions of the brain, and awards are given called the Way or Rhodes scholarships. And Academy Awards are given to those people who make the brain function better with pictures by a guy called Oscar. And Oscar is basically known as the name carried by butlers. And butlers are the people who help you get dressed. And getting dressed, it means putting on clothes. And putting on clothes basically means that you're dealing with the Neanderthaler who was the inventor of the scraper that allowed things to be scraped, and eventually the skin of animals could be used for clothes. And of course, a clothier today is the official name of the people who are most involved. They are clothiers, and at the same time they are tailors, because in order to get back down to genetic engineering, you have to be dealing with eggs, and with eggs you're dealing with chickens and cocks, and that means you have to have a tail. So the higher you go in the world of clothiers, the more likely you are to wear tails, as you saw being worn at weddings, specifically the wedding in the royal family that happened last weekend. So the coding structure is a language. It's a language that creates pictures. It's a language that uses the alphabet and the numbering system, but allows you to manipulate positions and meanings and words phonetically, so that you can basically communicate to your peers if you happen to be at the highest levels of these degrees. And I suggest that anyone below the 40th degree would have no real power in the real activity that is happening in the world. They tell you life begins at 40, and by that they mean the 40th degree, both in secret societies and in latitude. Now, in order to transfer all of this technology, they had to have a premise for what they were going to do once they got the technology transferred. It had to be used for its assigned lease period, and then it had to be repossessed. Today's reminder of this repossession is in Argentina. Argent in French, silver, means money, currency. Argentina is tan. Tina is part of that. And the big statue that stands with its arms extended is symbolic of Jesus, or Christ, the Redeemer. Now again, you have in the word Christ, IRS, and the Redeemer basically means repo man. So the IRS has a task of managing a system that will allow funds to be paid and value to be returned, interest. IRS is found in the word interest. Let's explain how this came about. When they first began setting up China and the drug world in Afghanistan, the pass in the mountains, the Khyber Pass in the mountains, became the appropriate place for a tax collector. And in those days, they called him the toll gator. And the toll gator's task was fairly easy. Marco Polo identified, along with his dad, granddad, what in Asia was significant and of value to be brought back over to the Middle East, and eventually on to Florence in Italy. Camels were found to be the easiest way to take things across the mountains and through the deserts and on to the Mediterranean. So the toll gators set up in the mountains. And as the caravan would come by, they'd come out, like Robin Hood in England later on. They would come out, stop the caravan, and say, you have two choices. Our preferred choice is that we take 15% off of each camel. And that becomes our take for allowing you to pass through our gate in these mountains. Our second choice is we kill you and we take it all. Now, if we kill you and take it all, we only get this once. But if you just add it as a cost of doing business, you can take it to wherever you're going, add that to your cost of doing business, collect it from whoever you're going to sell this stuff to, and still make your full profit, and even make a profit on what we've added here. And that became the deal for a long period of time, thousands of years. Until it was figured out by the Mediterranean sailors that you could sail around the Horn of Africa, go to Madagascar, make some arrangements, go to the island Reunion and other islands, go on to Sri Lanka and India, get pilots who would take you to Japan and have the Japanese go and negotiate with you the things you wanted to buy over there, and bring it back along the way, and the fees you would pay would be less than half of what you used to pay to go through the pass. And that worked for a while, a couple of 100 years, until somebody figured out that they're not making the same kind of money as they should be making going through the pass, the Khyber Pass. And what they should be doing is finding out where this stuff is being sold, what the prices are, and what that relates to. And when the information was brought back, the tollgaters came to the conclusion that, hey, we're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff here. We would be better off taking the money we have, going around the world, dumping off people in different places, marooning them, giving them funds to set up a government, giving them funds to set up an army, make this thing a 4 to 6 year project, and from that point begin to collect back fees on the money that was lent, so that we would have in fact created a country based upon a constellation that we determine is important for a certain task or function, and we would be earning money off of everything. Yeah, but their assistants who came out and said, when you started losing business, you told us to get in boats and sail the seas between Africa and here, and then on the other side into the area of America, and you found out from us that you could get higher fees because we're the pi rate. Pi r square means you kind of multiplied significantly the monies that you would be using, and you don't want to go and lose that. No, you don't have to worry. The pirates will be given tasks. You can, instead of working the ocean, you can say you work the river and call yourself banks. You can get involved in the financial industry. You can get involved in the energy industry, the transportation industry, and charge fees on everything you do, so that we'll be taking the taxes, the tolls from the top, and you'll be taking the fees from the bottom, and we'll maximize all of our production until the day comes when it's time to repossess that whole area, grab everything we can, bring it back significantly, make some hopscotch moves so they don't see the activity directly of bringing all of the value back to the caves in Tibet. And from there, we will make the moves that will close down the surface of the planet in stages and let it lie dormant. We'll have a few friends. Ami is a good word, means friends. They're connected friends, so we'll call them Amish. And they won't need the technology that the Christians, the Muslims, the Judeans, the Buddhists, the Hindus needed. They'll be able to let the earth lie fallow and just keep it plowed until we're ready to return. But in the meantime, we have to have this shutdown process that will take place, and we'll talk about that in the next session. So I suggest everybody goes and has something to eat. Don't eat too much because you'll be tired, and you'll have to watch this next part tomorrow instead of today. I know it's long, but it's not 60,000 years long. We should be able to complete this project in another hour or hour and a half when you return. So, see you then.